Greetings loyal subscribers and honoured guests. Welcome to the 6th and final episode in this initial run of Compilation Station 64. Well, this time I am taking a look at the 8 games that were included in the Taito coin-op hits, released by Imagine Software in 1989. This is by far the biggest compilation that I've looked at so far, so this episode may be a bit longer than most of them, but I thought it would be a good one to go out on this time. There's a nice mixture of platformers, shooters and a few other styles in this one, but a bit of a lack of racing games unfortunately for me. I do also have to add up front that I'm absolutely abysmal at pretty much every game in this collection, so that is why my gameplay is so rubbish. Nevertheless, it was fun going back to most of these after all this time. As with my Konami coin-op hits episode, I will be briefly showing the original arcade version as a point of comparison before I move on to the C64 version. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. I'm beginning with Rastan, which is a platform adventure game where you control the barbarian of the title. It won't take very long before it becomes clear that the Conan series was a big influence here, not just for Rastan himself, but for the strange grotesque enemies that he would do battle against, such as lizard men, blue skeleton guys with 4 arms, chimera type creatures, and many more besides. The arcade version is incredibly tough, as most coin-ops of the time were, but at least the controls feel very responsive. You start off with just a regular broadsword, but you can find battle axes and maces scattered around the stages. You can also pick up armour, a damage boost and occasionally health potions that are dropped by slain enemies. When I first booted up the C64 version of Rastan, I wasn't especially impressed. The graphics have obviously had a downgrade and the sword swing feels very sluggish. However, after spending a little time with the game, I grew to really enjoy it. The difficulty level has been dialed back a bit, so the slow sword doesn't really matter too much, and overall the game plays quite nicely. Yes, the visuals are lacking a lot of the detail and colour now, especially in the backgrounds, but you can still clearly tell what each of the enemies are supposed to be. The great music from the arcade game has also been carried over here very successfully. All in all, Rastan turned out to be one of my favourite games in this compilation, and I'm going to give it the first class award. I was really shocked to discover just how little the Zap staff liked Rastan. They gave it an appalling score of 42% and concluded things with an inconsistent, unrewarding and often dull arcade conversion. Perhaps I am in the minority of people who actually enjoyed the C64 version then. Be sure to let me know in the comments. Next up is Flying Shark excuse me. This is a World War II themed vertical shoot 'em up, in a similar vein to something like 1942, but a lot better given that a number of years have gone by between the two games. Everything about it, the graphics, the music, the sound and the overall gameplay, is pretty decent for the time, but I don't think it was anything particularly remarkable. I do enjoy this old-fashioned style of shooter a lot more than the modern bullet hell era personally, but this is probably down to my age and the fact that reaction times are not quick enough to avoid a hail of bullets anymore. Hell, even with these slower shoot-em-ups I still struggle to get very far without a ton of practice. Once again, I think that Flying Shark on the C64 is a pretty faithful recreation of the arcade game. You've got a nice, smooth, responsive game with not much sprite flicker on show, and the game manages to retain the music as well as the sound effects, which I feel is quite important for the atmosphere and overall level of enjoyability that a game offers. The level layout doesn't quite seem to be a one-to-one recreation of the arcade. For example, the first power-up seemed to appear a lot later in the level on the C64 version, unless I managed to completely miss one earlier, which is certainly possible. The restart point is also a bit harsh because I made it quite a lot further into the level, then died once and got sent back miles, which is frustrating. Overall, I can't say I'm all that blown away by Flying Shark. It seems like a fairly workmanlike shoot 'em up. It seems this time Zap agrees with me, as they gave the game a very average score of 63% and summed it up with a frustratingly difficult shoot 'em up of limited appeal. I think I'm going to tackle the two Arkanoid games back to back next, as they are both very similar. Taito brought the crusty gameplay of Breakout back from the Atari days and gave it a fresh lick of paint comprised of neater, more colourful graphics, power-ups and roaming enemy sprites. If you're not familiar with the concept, you control a bat and have to knock a ball against a wall of coloured bricks until you've destroyed all of them before moving on to the next level with a different layout. The power-ups sometimes fall from destroyed bricks in coloured capsules, and they include things like a sticky bat, splitting your ball into 3, a bigger bat, and lasers which let you blast away at the bricks with the aid of the fire button. The arcade cabinet was displayed in a vertical layout and had a spinner on it for precise control of the bat. The sequel, Revenge of Dough, came along a few years later and was pretty much more of the same with slightly better graphics, although this is debatable really, and a few new power-ups. The C64 versions of both of these games are extremely faithful conversions, and they offer a whole host of different control options including keyboard, joystick, Neos mouse support and the ability to use the paddle controllers from the Atari 2600, which had the same pin connector. The graphics are very nice, making use of the increased horizontal real estate of the C64 to the best effect, and the sound is very faithful to the original too. Given just how good these ports are, I really should be falling over myself to give these both first class awards, right? Yet I never really enjoyed the Arkanoid games very much. I find them too frustrating. It no doubt would have helped a bit if I had been able to use a mouse or paddle while capturing this footage, but all I had was a gamepad, which didn't feel too bad. The programmers have tweaked the game so that the standard joystick controls are a viable way of playing the game, but I am still crap at it regardless. So while I respect these C64 versions of the Arkanoid games, I could never love them. Zap on the other hand were quite fond of them, giving out scores of 80% for the original and 89% for Revenge of Dough respectively. They concluded their review of the sequel by saying, "Larger and more attractive than Arkanoid, and the most accomplished and playable Breakout variant so far. I was always more fond of Crackout myself, the one that tilted the whole genre on its side." Time to take a look at the other vertical shooter in this collection. Slapfight is another one much like Flying Shark that feels like a decent enough shooter from that time period, but nothing that's going to set the world on fire. It pinches the power-up system from Gradius, but of course it uses it in a vertical game instead of a horizontal one. By collecting the stars dropped from certain enemies, you advance the highlighted option on a bar along the bottom of the screen, which begins with a simple but much needed speed up option, and also includes things like side guns, bombs, and wings that bolster your firepower. This is all quite good fun, but the enemy designs are all rather boring really, at least in the first level. They are just round grey ships and turrets. There is quite a catchy little tune that plays in the background though. The C64 version is quite a faithful port, all things considered. It resembles its arcade parent visually, orally, and in the way it plays. The enemy placements are all fairly true to the original, and it is still pretty tough, even with infinite lives turned on. This is one of the games that makes use of the screen borders to display information, hence why the power-up indicator is partially cut off in my capture. This always seems to happen on the C64 Mini and Maxi, unfortunately. Anyway, much like Flying Shark, I feel that Slapfight is a pretty solid, functional shoot-em-up, but nothing very exciting. Give me something a bit more fantastical like Dragon Spirit or Phelius any day of the week. Zap were a bit more keen on the game than me, giving it a score of 80% and concluding with a superb arcade conversion and a great shoot-em-up in its own right. As for me, I think I would rate it closer to 70%. It's by no means horrible, but there are much better options out there. Now we come to Bubble Bobble, which probably needs no introduction for most of you, but it is a single screen 1 or 2 player platform game with incredibly cute and colourful graphics, twee music which after a while will get on your nerves, and a ton of gameplay to get through. It is also absolutely rammed with secrets to discover, such as hidden warps, bonus games and power-ups that only briefly appear in certain situations. As a co-op game enjoyed with a good friend, then this is pretty much unbeatable. but as a single player experience it falls rather short. If you are playing by yourself and lose all your lives, then it's game over straight away, no option to continue, so the chances of you getting very far on your own is pretty slim. But if you have someone else to play with, then you can just keep going for as long as you have credits. There is no doubt that the C64 conversion of Bubble Bobble is amazing. It truly felt arcade perfect back then, even though playing the two versions side by side today makes it clear that it wasn't quite as perfect as perceived. It was about as close as it was going to get though. I remember many a time when I would play through the game from beginning to end with a friend, with the aid of an action replay cartridge. It does take quite a bit of commitment and stamina from both players to do that, because you need to finish all 100 levels twice in order to see the true ending. Some of the levels can be a real pain in the arse as well, such as the one where you have to jump on your bubbles to reach the enemies and clear the stage, but they just keep popping. This is the perfect sort of game for the C64 though, and it looks great, plays really well, and sounds just like the arcade game, annoying earworm and all. Zap were in complete agreement with me on this one, giving out a score of 97% and finishing up with a superlative conversion which retains all of the fun and features of the original. It thoroughly deserves a first class award. Next we come to Renegade, which is a very popular game both in the arcade and on the home computers, spawning two computer exclusive sequels in the shape of Target Renegade and Renegade 3 The Final Chapter. This arcade beat 'em up started life as a western localization of one of the Kunio-kun games, as did the first Double Dragon. It is notable for featuring a control system that includes separate buttons for punching or kicking left and right, as well as another button for jumping. The arcade version is decent enough with some nice graphics and a fun tune that accompanies the action, but it is punishingly difficult. The enemies gang up on you and pummel you from either side. Your best bet is to move over to the edge of the train platform where you are fighting and try and knock them over the edge, but this is extremely tricky to pull off. I find the Commodore 64 version of Renegade to be absolute hell to play, due to the truly bizarre mapping of the buttons. You move your character around with the joystick in your right hand, but are expected to fight using the upper left key on the keyboard to hit left, the 2 key to hit right, and the 1 key to jump. I get that they were trying to retain the feel of the arcade original with the different directional attacks, but there surely could have been a better option than these 3 keys. Couple this with the same high difficulty of the arcade game and you have a pretty much unplayable experience in my opinion. It doesn't even matter if the graphics and sound do a pretty good job of capturing the arcade original, which they do, if the game itself is so painful to play. This is the turd of the collection, without a doubt. I can't believe Zap would give this 90%, absolute madness. Here's what they had to say. A thoroughly entertaining fighting romp through New York. If Imagine had just simplified the controls so that you could fight using one joystick button, or that they had gone for a more sensible choice of keys, then they could have been onto a winner here, but the bizarre controls ruined the game for me. That just leaves us with The Legend of Kaguya, which I hadn't really heard of until a few years ago. The arcade game is a rather strange experience where you control a very feminine looking ninja dude who has had his girlfriend kidnapped by baddies. The first stage sees you leaping high amongst the treetops, fending off the enemy ninjas with your shurikens and sword before locating some kind of magic item in the branches of one of the trees. This triggers a lot of flashing lights, kills all of the baddies and lets you move on to the next stage. At least I think it does, because when I collected the magic item on the C64 version, I still couldn't exit the level, so I may have been missing something. Now, I know that there are those who have a fondness of this game. It is quite popular in its home of Japan, and people seem to remember the NES version quite fondly as well, but I find it a bit strange. I don't think it looks especially good, even for the time it was made, and the controls feel very floaty. If I'm going to play a ninja game, I would much rather play something like Shinobi or Ninja Spirit. This is supposedly one of those infamously bad conversions on the C64, but I found it to be reasonably faithful to the arcade game, i.e. a game that wasn't especially good to begin with. Yes, it looks pretty ugly on the Commodore, but the game was already ugly to begin with. It's a shame that the excellent music stops as soon as you get into the game proper. Control-wise, the game has the same wishy-washy floaty feel of the arcade version. I actually think that Imagine has done a pretty serviceable job of converting this game across. The problem is that it was not really a good enough game to be worthy of converting in the first place. Zap gave the game a score of 63%, which is pretty much where I would place it too. They summed up with playable, but nothing special. So that's all 8 games then. My 2 standout picks are definitely Bubble Bobble and Rastan, but I think I may be in the minority in thinking that Rastan is a good game. Yes, it does take quite a hit in the visuals, but it still plays well, and the great music is also still intact. Time to ask my audience what they thought of this collection. Do you agree with my assessment, or would you place anything higher? Did you actually enjoy playing Renegade? Making these over the last few months has been a lot of fun, and I'm going to continue doing so eventually with another series of 6 episodes all devoted to looking at the Quatro compilations from Codemasters. For now though, I'm going to go on a bit of a break to focus on something else for a little while. It will probably be another 6 episode series looking at various PlayStation 1 games, so if you like that system as well, make sure to join me for those. For now though, it's time to bring this video to an end. Hope to see you on the next one, and in the meantime, take care.